Okay, dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome you all to our conference, The Silent Coup, the European Commission's Power Grab. My name is Ákos Bencegat, and I will be the moderator tonight. Welcome you all. And you know, freedom of speech is very important for us, and that is why I have 3 different microphones, so I'm really free to speak. Please, during the event, feel free to speak and ask questions. We will have 2 rounds of questions at the end for the public. And now I do not want to take the time, but I would like to ask Frank Furedi, Executive Director of MCC Brussels, to hold the opening speech. Please, Frank.
Thank you very much. J'ai remarqué qu'il y a beaucoup de Français dans cette chambre. Il y a plus de Français que les peuples qui viennent de Hongrie. Alors c'est une bonne chose. Je suis très heureuse et bienvenue parce que je pense que c'est très important pour nous avoir une alliance forte entre les 2 nations. Maintenant, je vais parler anglais parce que la plupart de peuples est anglais ici. Welcome. I'm really glad you could come. I'm the director of MCC Brussels, and what we're doing is something super exciting because we think it's about time that we had a movement, an intellectual movement, that can develop a sovereigntist politics that takes the interest of nations of Europe seriously. I'm convinced that the most important thing in Brussels at the moment is to fight this kind of blind federalism, which basically regards borders and nationalities as an inconvenience. And in a sense, is committed to this process of continually federalizing our lives. And if you will notice, and this is what's exciting about Thomas's report, if you notice, they're using salami tactics, taking a little bit more away from the nation, giving a little bit more to the Commission, and then just when you think they're finished, they start again. And we believe that federalization in the next year that will be coming will be even more comprehensive, so we have a bigger fight on our hands. And it seems to me that there are issues on which Europeans of all nationalities, of a conservative imagination, must come together and fight. One of the things that really scares me and I'm concerned about is that historically the right, historically conservatives, are always very divided. We seem to be far more divided than the left is, and we spend far too much time positioning against one another. I think we're going to stop doing that, especially on those questions that are common to all of us. All of us believe in sovereignty. All of us know that, for example, mass migration is a threat to our existence. All of us know that this crazy Green Deal that they're trying to shove down our throat is going to have a major destructive consequence in our life. All of us know that we have to defend the people in the countryside, the farmers, the small farmers. We all have an interest in making sure that rural Europe retains its strength. And I just hope that in the months to come, you will join us in this journey that we're undertaking, an intellectual journey where we want to come together, have conversations, have debates, and learn from one another. Because unless we learn from our experience, we will not grow, will not have the strength to be able to have the intellectual resources to fight the Commission, the politics of the Commission, and the federalist movement that is trying to, in a sense, belittle us and throw a cordon sanitaire around anybody with a nationalist idea, with a sovereigntist idea. And therefore, I hope that this discussion will be the beginning of a common adventure that you all want to engage in. Thank you. Just one point. On the 24th of September, we're having a discussion on unshackling Europe's economy. We think that we have a different and a better approach than the protectionist, over-regulatory European Commission. And we're going to have an interesting debate between different types of economists about what is the best way of making Europe more competitive.
Thank you very much, Frank. Welcome you everyone once again, and let me introduce you our special speakers today. So on my right, we have Mathilde Androuet, who is member of the European Parliament for the Patriots Group from France. So please welcome her. And on my left, we have Thomas Fazi, who is the author of the report, which is the basis of our event today, the Silent Coup. So he will talk about his report, and Mathilde Androuet will comment. So welcome you too. And since we are very patriots, we have also a translator, because we will use not only the English language, but also the French language. So we have Kirian, who is the translator. Please welcome him as well, because he will have a big job. So thank you very much. And I would like to ask first, Thomas, please introduce your report. So if you don't mind to go to the lectern, we will appreciate. You have 15 minutes, as we agreed, but now it's said in public as well, and we have to be very, very strict, stricter than the European Commission on regulations.
Remember, I'm Italian, though. Grab me some slack. Okay. Let's put this here. Okay. So. Okay. Well, thank you, Bense, for the introduction. And it's great seeing so many people here tonight. I think it really goes to show that there's much love for von der Leyen and the Commission in Brussels. It's really heartwarming. So I'm just putting my clock on. No, but seriously, thank you for coming, and of course a big thanks to Frank Ferretti and the MCC Brussels for giving me the opportunity to write this paper and for organizing this event, and more in general for the great work that I think the whole team is doing in injecting a much needed dose of sanity, rationality, dissent, and diversity, different kind of diversity, into the Brussels debate. It's a real pleasure working with you guys. And of course, thank you, Mathilde, for accepting this invitation. Okay, so why this paper? Well, first of all, because we felt it was necessary to draw people's attention to a deeply disturbing trend that most European citizens, I think, are unaware of, if not on a very superficial, instinctual level. And that even a lot of people in the Brussels bubble, I think, fail to fully appreciate. And that is the way in which, over the past 15 years in particular, we have witnessed what has been, to all intents and purposes, an institutional revolution within the European Union, albeit, of course, a revolution from above, a passive revolution, as Gramsci would have said. And that is a constant and exponential process of supranationalization and commissionization, as they call it in the report, of the policy-making process, whereby the European Commission and the supranational institutions of the European Union more in general, the ECB and especially, but also the European Court of Justice, have constantly and exponentially expanded their powers and competences, even in areas where they previously had none, even in areas where they have no formal competences, at the expense of national sovereignty, the national sovereignty of member states, of intergovernmentalism more in general, and ultimately of democracy. And as said, this is a phenomenon that I think most people fail to fully understand and appreciate, and yet it represents, I think, the greatest threat that we face in Europe today, to the extent that it is at the root of virtually all the problems facing Europe and of our inability to resolve them. So the first aim of this paper is to draw the attention, attention to the problem, and hopefully kickstart or help push through and widen a much needed public debate. And the second aim is to provide some crucial, I think, analytical tools to those who are aware of this phenomenon. And I assume that most, if not all, people in this room, of course, are aware of what's happening, but yet may fail to understand exactly how this is happening and what is really driving this phenomenon. And mind you, this is not by chance, this is by design. So people are not supposed to understand. The reason it's so hard for people, especially ordinary citizens, to understand how this process has occurred is because it didn't happen as a result of a big public debate, a democratic debate. It didn't happen as a result of formal treaty changes, of referenda, like democracy. No, it has mostly occurred surreptitiously through various forms of so-called competence creep, with no formal treaty changes, outside of the arena of democratic debate, and often even outside of the boundaries of the law and the treaties themselves. So this is why some scholars refer to the process of European supranational integration as one of integration by stealth or covert integration, and that is a totally undemocratic form of economic and political integration. And in this paper, I describe this process as integration by coup or coups, hence the title of the paper. Because, borrowing a phrase from the political philosopher Perry Anderson, I really think that the concept of the coup, which Anderson describes as an action taken suddenly by stealth, catching its victims unaware and confronting them with a fait accompli that cannot be reversed, I think this really encapsulates, better than anything else, the history and the trajectory of European integration, especially over the past decade and a half. Hence the idea, building upon Bence's own great report on the United States of Europe, to flesh out in detail just how this power accrual has occurred, with a focus on some of the most crucial turning points insofar as this phenomenon of commissionization has occurred. Not just as a contribution to the public debate and even a scholarly debate maybe, but also as a tool, and perhaps even most importantly as a tool of political action, if you will, because if we want to slow down, stop, and ideally reverse this trend, and I think anyone who believes in democracy should want that, regardless of their political orientation. And full disclosure, I myself come from the tradition of the old school anti-EU left, so there was a time when the left used to understand these issues. Not anymore. So as I was saying, if we want to slow down, stop, and reverse this process, then we need to understand the dynamics that are driving it. And as I said, the paper focuses on some key historical turning points or crises, which were all exploited by the EU and the Commission in particular to expand their powers at the expense of national sovereignties. Integration through crises is, of course, another way scholars refer to the process of EU integration. And so I focus on three events in particular: the Euro crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the Ukraine war. And I'll now briefly go over each one of those crises. Now, the Euro crisis might seem like ancient history, but it can't not be mentioned in this story because it really was in many ways the first major coup, a classic example of shock doctrine, which is the idea that in moments of public fear and panic and disorientation, it's much easier to re-engineer societies and institutions, either because people will be distracted or because they'll be much more willing to accept even unpopular reforms if these are seen as helping resolve the crisis at hand. And as we'll see, this is a recurrent theme throughout all EU crises. So during the Euro crisis, we witnessed really in a relatively short time span a breathtaking expansion of the powers of the intervention of the EU supranational institutions, namely the Commission and the ECB, for example, through the Troika. And this all led really to a game-changing transfer of sovereignty from the national to the supranational level. And many of these powers were then institutionalized and constitutionalized through a series of laws, agreements, and even in this case, a new treaty, the Fiscal Compact. And as a result, in that case, the EU, mainly through the European Commission, effectively became for the first time a sovereign power with the authority to impose budgetary rules and structural reforms on member states, of course, particularly those of the Eurozone, outside of any form of democratic control. Really, and this in my book fits the definition of a coup, as citizens were completely excluded from the whole process. The Euro crisis, I think, tells us two things about the nature of supranationalization. First, its path-dependent nature. What this means is that even limited forms of supranational integration create institutional, material, and even psychological path dependencies that make further transfers of sovereignty inevitable, or apparently so, further down the line. And the history of the euro, how the euro itself came about, is an obvious example of this. And of course, this was very well understood by the fathers of European integration, which adopted this step-by-step approach deliberately and consciously. So I think one of the lessons here is that you can't just have a bit of supranationalization. Once you go down that path, it's very hard to avoid escalation. Although we want to be optimistic, so we'll try to sketch out some solutions tonight, hopefully. And then the other lesson of the Euro crisis is the way in which temporary, one-off emergency solutions that are presented as contingent on responding swiftly to the crisis at hand then give rise very quickly to new institutional realities, which then become the status quo, the new normal. So during the Euro crisis, we went from the Troika, an emergency body, to the Fiscal Compact, an actual treaty. So in many ways, the Juncker Commission laid down the blueprint for this shock doctrine approach to crises, so using crises to surreptitiously expand the Commission's ability to intervene into areas that were previously reserved to member states, and intervene in the affairs of member states themselves, of course. But von der Leyen, which is really the focus of the report, I think took this approach to a whole new level, first during the COVID-19 crisis and then during the Ukraine crisis. And I see time is ready right now, so I'll try and cut to the chase. So, of course, the pandemic was extraordinary for obviously a number of reasons, but also for the way in which von der Leyen was able to really put herself, take a leading role throughout the whole affair. First in devising the economic recovery program, or so-called economic recovery program, and then in organizing the joint procurement of the vaccines. The Next Generation EU package was essentially devised by von der Leyen, and this didn't simply in itself accrue greater power to the Commission, which now had a powerful tool through which it could exert further pressure on member states by having the final word on how that money is spent, but also to blackmail states by withholding funds to states in breach of the Brussels agenda, as it did with Hungary and Poland, of course. But perhaps, and even more importantly, I think von der Leyen, under the guise of responding to the crisis, was able to effectively change, I would say, the actually existing economic constitution of the European Union by getting the EU to embark on a massive joint borrowing program. Now, the point here isn't whether one thinks this is a good thing or not, and this is a caveat that I'll keep repeating throughout the talk. The point is that this is something that has long faced strong opposition by certain countries and electorates, and that was ultimately overcome not through democratic deliberation, not through debate, but through emergency politics. So yet another coup. And then, of course, we have the vaccine procurement program, which saw von der Leyen effectively single-handedly negotiate a staggering 70 billion euros worth of contracts on behalf of member states, of course, to purchase up to 4.6 billion doses of vaccines. That's more than 10 doses for each European citizen. The issue, again, here is not what one thinks of the vaccine program, that's another debate, but the way in which the centralization of the procurement process didn't lead to the cheapest and most efficient outcome, as claimed by the supranational rhetoric, but in fact led to a massive waste of money. According to one study, the EU, and therefore the member states, overpaid the vaccines by more than 30 billion euros. And it also led to highly questionable, if not outright fraudulent or illegal practices, such as the infamous Pfizer-Gate scandal, where von der Leyen personally negotiated a 35 billion euro deal for the purchase of up to 1.8 billion doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine via a series of text messages and calls with Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla, which after 3 years she still refuses to hand over. So much for transparency, Mrs. von der Leyen. So the Commission emerged from the pandemic more powerful than ever, with unprecedented powers of intervention in matters of public health and economic policy, but this wasn't enough for von der Leyen. Ever since her first address as president in 2019, she had made it clear that she wanted the Commission to play a much greater role in the one area where governments historically have been the most reluctant to grant power to the EU, that is foreign policy and military and defense policy in particular. She said she wanted a geopolitical commission. Well, the Ukraine crisis provided her with the perfect opportunity to do just that. And she did this once again by seizing the window of opportunity created by the crisis to place herself at the lead of the bloc's response. So first she relied on the technical expertise of the Commission, or alleged expertise, if we look at the results of those policies, to essentially single-handedly devise the sanctions policies against Russia. Especially in the early months of the following the invasion, member states were virtually absent from the whole process. They literally limited themselves to rubber stamping the sanctions packages that were put forward by the Commission. In fact, von der Leyen, especially during that early period, coordinated more with the Americans than she did with the member states themselves, which is astonishing in itself, of course, and there would be much more to say about the way in which von der Leyen worked tirelessly throughout her mandate to align the EU with NATO and US interests, and maybe we'll have a chance to talk a bit more about that. Again, this was presented as being contingent on the need to respond swiftly to the crisis. But it soon led to institutional transformations, such as granting the Commission the power to establish and enforce EU-wide penalties for the violation of sanctions. That was something which until then had been the remit of individual member states. So once again, we see the same dynamics at play. One-off emergency solutions that then become the new institutional status quo. But more in general, by placing herself at the helm of the sanctions regime, von der Leyen was able to become the de facto foreign policy spokesperson for the EU, and especially for its military approach to Ukraine and then to Gaza as well. Well, of course, the European Commission has no formal competences in matters of military and defense policy, and she did this, not only by adopting a very aggressive rhetoric against Russia, but also by making sweeping commitments in the name of all member states to help Ukraine for as long as it takes, and promising EU membership to Ukraine, even though there were and still are significant differences among member states on these issues. And once again, the point isn't whether one agrees with von der Leyen's approach to the Russia-Ukraine war or any other policy for that matter. That's another debate. The point is the way in which, through these statements, she was able to effectively lock in policies before they had been formally approved by member states and, let alone national parliaments, not only on crucial matters of military and defense policy, but on fiscal and spending policy as well, by promising open-ended financial commitments to Ukraine. So one may argue that member states, ultimately remain in charge to the extent that any policy ultimately needs to be approved by the European Council. But I think this ignores the way in which such statements effectively create a new epistemic reality on the ground, to which member states then come under very heavy pressure to conform to. And I think we saw a lot of that during the Ukraine conflict. So my time is basically up. So I guess I'll wrap up by saying, I think the major lesson here is that there seems to be no obvious economic or practical trade-off for the dramatic loss of democratic control and accountability resulting from the erosion of national sovereignty implicit in the deepening of the EU's process of supranationalization, especially over the past decade. On the contrary, lack of oversight, I think, shows, past crises simply exacerbates the capture of the decision-making process by powerful vested interests driven by profit, power, ideology, or usually a mixture of these factors, leading to suboptimal outcomes, at least for society at large. And I think the von der Leyen presidency is the living example of that. Many of her policies are directly responsible for the absolutely tragic state of Europe, in economic terms, in terms of industrial competitiveness, in terms of its self-inflicted energy crisis, in terms of the looming threat of a direct confrontation with Russia, and more in general, in terms of the complete abdication of Europe to the pursuit of its own strategic interests and complete vassalization to the US when it comes to not only foreign policy, unfortunately. And so this is why I think it's more important than ever to seriously think about how we can push back against this trend of supranationalism and restore democracy and national sovereignties in Europe, because I really don't see any other way that we can get out of the situation that we're in. Thank you. And
thank you very much, Thomas. It was wonderful regarding the content, and also you kept the time, so thank you very much as the moderator. I really recommend everyone to read this report, because it's an in-depth report with references, but it's not too long neither. No, it's consumable. Yeah, I think it's the right thing to read right this weekend. So please do not hesitate. And now I would like to ask Mathilde Androuet, s'il vous plaît, Madame Androuet, si vous pouvez faire vos commentaires. Merci beaucoup. Because it was interesting to see the point of view of a researcher and journalist, and now we will have the point of view of a politician, an acting politician. So please listen to Mathilde Androuet in French, and this will be translated paragraph by paragraph or by ideas into English.
Okay. Je voulais d'abord remercier évidemment l'antenne bruxelloise du MCC pour son invitation à la clarification d'un processus qui nous concerne tous, à savoir qui nous gouverne. Comme vous voulez, okay. Je prendrai donc la parole en français, eu égard à mon combat politique pour la défense de mon identité, la langue étant certainement le premier vecteur de transmission culturelle, et je suis attachée à l'originalité culturelle des peuples européens, et plus spécifiquement de la France. Et j'épargnerai aussi vos oreilles en évitant de parler un anglais de vache espagnole, ce qui me permet aussi de rendre hommage au travail de l'ombre, mais ô combien précieux, de nos traducteurs.
Sorry, the microphone. Yeah.
I'd like to extend my warmest thanks to the MCC office in Brussels, and I'd like to thank them for inviting me to clarify this process, which matters to us all whether or not we're interested in politics, that is, who governs us. I will speak in French in the light of my political fight and in defense of my identity, and I'm firmly attached to the cultural specificity of European people, in my case, France, and I will also spare your ears in speaking in my own language rather than in an English, as we say in French, of a Spanish cow. And this will allow me to pay tribute to the work of interpreters. Thank you.
Alors, ce n'est pas très amical, mais je voudrais d'abord interroger le titre de votre rapport, Monsieur Hazy, à savoir, peut-on vraiment parler de coup d'État concernant la Commission européenne ? À dire vrai, un coup d'État, c'est une manigance, une surprise. Or, rien n'a été fait dans notre dos. En réalité, dès l'article 1 du traité sur l'Union européenne, traité dont la Commission se veut la gardienne, l'objectif est clair, il faut une union sans cesse plus étroite. Il existe donc depuis le début une concurrence naturelle, intrinsèque au fonctionnement des institutions européennes. La Commission, donc organe exécutif de l'Union européenne, est l'organe le plus dévoué à cette union et donc est en concurrence directe avec tous nos États. Il agit, se construit, mais se pense aussi comme un État, une sorte de supra-État européen qui supplante toutes les autres constructions. Et c'est pour ça qu'on arrive progressivement à avoir, par exemple, comme l'an passé, le rapport Verhofstadt qui nous a été proposé dans l'hémicycle, à savoir pour une union plus intégrée qui voulait faire de la Commission un gouvernement européen et proposer l'idée d'organiser une élection du président de l'Europe.
So this might be a bit unfriendly, Thomas, but I would like to question the title of your report, because I believe this is not a coup, it is a blow against states. A coup is a blow in French. But everything was preordained. What is a coup? A coup is akin to a surprise. It's akin to a plot, but it's all out in the open. From the onset of the treaty, in Article 1, a treaty of which the Commission strives to be the keeper, the objective is clearly set out. We need an increasingly integrated union. From the onset, there is natural competition. This is inherent to the way the European institutions operate. The Commission is the executive body of the European Union, and it is the body devoted to the Union. And it is in direct competition with states. It thinks like a state, it acts like a state, and it is organized as a state. A supra-European state that supersedes all other European constructions and all other constructions. Thus, we have the Verhofstadt report in 2023, advocating for a more integrated union that wanted to make the Commission the government of Europe and that argued for the election of a European president.
Alors, en effet, on constate, la Commission européenne prend les oripeaux d'un État, se veut à une monnaie, bas monnaie, à un hymne, et à une sorte de mythe fondateur selon lequel l'Union européenne serait la garantie d'une paix. Une sorte de... Voilà, c'est en effet le mythe qui est récurrent chez les européistes. J'ignore, enfin en tout cas en France c'est très frappant, j'ignore si c'est la même chose dans tous les autres pays européens, mais l'Europe c'est la paix et le sorte de condensé qui justifie tous les abus de la Commission européenne. Même si, réellement, la guerre est revenue sur notre continent, il n'en demeure pas moins que dans l'esprit des européistes, l'Europe, c'est la paix. Bon, ok. Mais, à dire vrai, s'il y a donc ces aspects qui peuvent rappeler un État, ce n'est pas non plus un État au sens classique du terme. Un État, une nation, c'est une géographie, une histoire et un peuple. Là encore, l'Union européenne se démarque des trajectoires classiques, des définitions classiques d'un État. En effet, l'Union européenne a pour figure tutélaire l'étranger, tout ce qui n'est pas européen, encore mieux s'il est clandestin, et a des frontières mouvantes. En effet, l'Union européenne ne cesse de s'étendre et peut-être un jour, si la Turquie aboutit à son processus d'intégration, nous aurons une frontière commune avec l'Irak. Donc, en effet, une extension et une géographie pour le moins mouvante. Et bien sûr, par ailleurs, elle se refuse de convoquer l'histoire pour créer un peuple européen. C'est ça aussi qui est assez étonnant. L'histoire européenne est aux yeux de la Commission européenne criminelle, patriarcale, sanguinaire. Il faut absolument évacuer même les références chrétiennes ou même de grammaire et d'orthographe. Nous avons quand même eu, de la part de Helena Dalli, commissaire à l'égalité en 2021, un document qui demandait donc d'évacuer le terme de Noël, voilà, qui est quand même peut-être le seul moment de trêve dans le monde, Noël, ou le masculin dans le langage, pour être un peu plus inclusif. On a aussi eu, alors là, au sein du Parlement européen, une résolution sur la conscience historique européenne, au mois de janvier dernier, qui est une sorte d'avilissement pour l'Europe, où il ne faut en enseigner l'histoire qu'à travers le colonialisme, à travers les moments les plus terribles qui ont été les guerres mondiales, et toujours en battant sa coulpe, mais jamais en mettant en valeur ce qui est quand même une des civilisations les plus riches qui ait pu exister. Et on a aussi quelques drôleries quand même, il faut savoir un peu rire quand même en étant commissaire, à savoir des projets comme explorer les paysages urbains de l'Union européenne pour déconstruire les récits coloniaux et des marches de décolonisation urbaine dans l'Union européenne. Donc en fait, on repère 7 villes de l'Union européenne pour éradiquer dans ces villes les références liées à l'héritage colonial, pour ensuite les renommer du point de vue des peuples colonisés. C'est une espèce de chose un peu étrange qui juste vise à effacer notre histoire et de la reconstruire selon un angle woke. Et bien sûr, ce projet est financé par vos impôts, puisqu'il est intégré au projet citoyen, égalité, droits et valeurs, qui coûte la bagatelle d'1,55 milliard d'euros.
The EU strives to appear as a state. It has a currency, it has a hymn, it has a founding myth. And it also uses some of the tools of a classical state. It has created a unique currency, a hymn and a founding myth, as I said, and it sees itself as the guardian angel of peace. And this is really true in France. It's really etched in the brains of my compatriots. And for Europhiles, Europe is peace. And even when war is currently unfolding in our own continent, and as it is unfolding, the Commission is showing hawkish impulses in this conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And we can clearly see that the Commission is not a vector for peace. But the EU is not a state in the classical acception of the term. It has unclear borders in constant expansion, and its ideal people is a people composed of foreigners in a break with history. But a state, it is a geography, it is history, it is a people. And there again, the European Union veers off the course. Indeed, the EU believes the tutelary figure is the foreigner, even better if he's an illegal. It has moving borders, it regularly includes new members, and sometimes the admissibility criteria are not really enforced. Imagine if Turkey would join the EU. Then we would have a border with Iraq. And this clearly imperils the construction of the EU and the harmonious operation of institutions. On the contrary to states and classical civilizations, the EU refuses to conjure up the glorious history of Europe. In the eyes of the EU, Europe is criminal, Europe is patriarchal, Europe is bloodthirsty. And you also must absolutely elude all references to Christianity or even to grammar or spelling. In a 2021 internal document of the European Commission, or commanded by Mrs. Helena Dalli, it is said in the name of equality and non-discrimination that commissioners should show the example and exclude Christian names, and please do not speak about Christmas or avoid using masculine endings in their speeches in order to be more inclusive. There's also the resolution of on the historical conscience of Europe of the 17th of January 2024, which is a real degradation of history. And you have a number of different projects that strive to deconstruct colonial narratives. They organized some decolonial manifestations in different cities across the European Union, and they strove to really eradicate all references to colonial history, and they wanted then to push people to rename them by adopting the perspective of colonized people. And all this is done with the money of the taxpayers in the framework of the program Citizens, Equality, Rights and Values. They're trying to repaint our history with a woke prism, with the taxpayers' money.
En réalité, plus qu'un super État, la Commission serait une sorte de super manager. En effet, on s'aperçoit que dans le processus qui est opéré par la Commission, on troque progressivement la démocratie pour une technocratie. La chose est évidemment accélérée sous Ursula von der Leyen, mais il n'en demeure pas moins que ce processus relève beaucoup plus de stratégie managériale, issu de manuels de marketing, plus qu'un manuel de Machiavel. Et c'est pour ça que l'appellation de supra-epta, en quelque sorte, m'interroge pour qualifier la Commission. Pour opérer comme il se doit, la Commission utilise des stratégies qui, elles aussi, empruntent au monde du management. Il y a 3 stratégies, selon moi. Celle du grignotage, où elle s'arroge de plus en plus de domaines, en agrandissant en quelque sorte les définitions, par exemple, du terme de subsidiarité. La stratégie du chantage, qui est selon moi la plus terrible, et celle de la peur. Celle du grignotage. Alors, peut-être... Faites la traduction.
More than a supranational state, the Commission is an overly ambitious manager, and they wish to supersede democracy with a technocratic government. And this has sped up under the aegis of Ursula von der Leyen. I believe that their methods are more akin to a marketing approach rather than a Machiavel handbook. The European Commission has a number of strategies in that regard. It has 3 strategies, I believe. It strives to slowly deconstruct the fabric of the EU and claim an increasing number of fields in its remit. It also uses blackmail and fear.
Alors, première stratégie, celle du grignotage. Typiquement, le dévoiement du principe de subsidiarité, qui est établi à travers les traités européens, qui appelle à ce que l'institution la plus proche, la plus apte à réagir, agisse en premier lieu. Je prends un exemple, celui de la révision du règlement Dublin 3. Il s'avère que normalement, la logique voudrait que chaque nation décide de qui rentre chez lui. En tout cas, quelles sont les personnes habilitées à pouvoir franchir sa frontière. Mais la Commission est assez vicieuse et étend un peu les définitions. Pour elle, toute personne venant d'un pays tiers, venant dans un État membre, cela a un aspect, c'est une question transnationale, et donc c'est à elle de la gérer. Donc ce n'est plus à l'État de gérer ça, compte tenu du fait que la personne vient d'un pays tiers et arrive dans un État membre. Autre exemple, on a l'article 3 de l'Union européenne, des traités de l'Union européenne. La Commission défend l'économie de marché et le libre-échange. Il n'en demeure pas moins qu'elle est prolifique en termes de réglementation ou empêche des soutiens d'État à leur économie et ce qui parasite définitivement la liberté d'entreprendre ou de commercer. On a encore un exemple très récent, a priori, c'est que la Commission européenne décide de faire des amendes pour les constructeurs automobiles qui ne construiraient pas assez de véhicules électriques, alors que ces constructeurs s'adaptent juste aux réalités du marché. Et enfin, là aussi où elle essaye de grignoter en trouvant des prétextes pour s'arroger certains domaines, il va, a priori, on verra ça peut-être semaine prochaine, la commission du logement, une nouvelle commission va apparaître, donc au sein de la Commission européenne, celle du logement, au prétexte, et ce qui est vrai, que tous les Européens sont confrontés à des grandes questions, à des grandes problématiques liées à la question du logement. Il n'en demeure pas moins que le terme logement ou l'hébergement n'apparaît aucunement, mais jamais, dans les traités européens. Donc voilà, typiquement, un domaine où la Commission européenne a surinterprété le principe de subsidiarité.
So these are 3 strategies. First strategy, the slow deconstruction of the fabric of the EU. And I'm thinking first and foremost of how it derails the principle of subsidiarity. Subsidiarity is enshrined in EU treaties. It is the concept according to which you're supposed to take the decision at the lowest level possible, the closest to the local level. Take the revision of the Dublin III regulation, according to which the movements of third country nationals in a member state are supposed to be perceived as a transnational matter and therefore in the remit of the Commission. Thus, the Commission takes charge of migration policies and hinders nations in their freedom of choosing who enters their own countries. Another example, in the Article 3 of the treaty, the Commission is meant to defend the free market economy and free trade. But it interprets this in a way that leads it to produce an increasing number of rules that often parasite said free trade. For instance, they've recently decided that some car makers that did not produce EV vehicles would be fined. Other example, the Housing Commission about to be created. Nowhere in the EU treaties is housing mentioned. Then again, housing is indeed a concern for European citizens, but again, it is never mentioned in EU treaties, and that shows that the Commission is trying to do legislative power grab.
L'autre stratégie, et là où on peut rejoindre en effet l'appellation de coup d'État donnée par notre confrère, qui est la gestion par le chantage. Et à mon avis, c'est celle-ci qui est la plus problématique parce qu'il s'agit clairement d'abus, notamment au chantage aux fonds européens. Très concrètement, on a eu l'aveu de la part de Leszek Miller, qui était donc ancien Premier ministre donc de gauche polonais, qui est à ce jour eurodéputé, qui a avoué publiquement que les fonctionnaires de la Commission reconnaissaient ouvertement que le blocage des fonds pour la Pologne avait eu pour but d'entraîner un changement de gouvernement. Et c'est là, en effet, où l'appellation de coup d'État est beaucoup plus réelle et mesurable. Évidemment, nos amis hongrois le subissent au quotidien. En juin 2024, la Cour de justice européenne a ordonné à la Hongrie de payer 200 millions d'euros pour irrespect de la législation européenne concernant justement la gestion des migrants. Et la Hongrie est donc astreinte par ailleurs à payer 1 million d'euros par jour de retard de paiement de cette amende. La Commission européenne a fixé la nouvelle échéance de paiement la semaine prochaine, au 17 septembre. Et si Budapest ne verse pas la somme d'ici là, la Commission européenne s'octroie le droit de prendre ces 200 millions d'euros d'amende sur les fonds alloués normalement, légalement, à la Hongrie. Donc c'est un véritable chantage permanent qui est exercé, et on a pu aussi le constater sur les élections italiennes, c'est-à-dire que Ursula von der Leyen, avant même le scrutin, s'est exprimée pour donner son avis et sommer les Italiens de ne pas voter pour Madame Giorgia Meloni. Celle-ci, une fois élue, il n'en demeure pas moins qu'il y a un assouplissement aussi bien du discours italien, du seul fait que les fonds européens sont toujours un enjeu, et un enjeu finalement de chantage. Et c'est là où clairement l'abus caractérisé de cette manœuvre peut nous faire rappeler en effet la notion de coup d'État.
The second strategy can indeed lead me to think about it being a coup, that is a blackmail. Former leftist prime minister, now member of the European Parliament, Leszek Miller, publicly conceded that Commission officials openly said that freezing the funds destined to Poland aimed to bring about a change in government. So in that case, I believe when you blackmail a country, you could say that coup is the adequate term. Then another example, our Hungarian friends suffer from this approach too. The EU Commission has imposed fines on them, and in June 2024 there was a decision of the European Court of Justice, and it ordered Hungary to pay 200 million euros because they did not observe EU legislation. In that case, it was about managing migrant flows. So Hungary was convicted and had to pay a daily penalty of 1 million euro per day for being late and not observing a decision made in December 2020. And the Commission has set a new deadline for payment on the 17th of September. And if Budapest does not pay, the Commission will launch a compensation procedure and deduct these 200 million euros from the budget of the EU habitually allocated to Hungary. But this blackmail also operates in other countries. You can think about Italy, where the strategy was deployed, and Ursula von der Leyen also called on Italians not to vote for Giorgia Meloni. And and afterwards the narrative in Italy was a bit more softened in order to receive these funds and to manage the Italian economic crisis.
Enfin, la dernière stratégie, c'est la gestion par la peur. Ça a été évoqué donc par notre camarade précédent. À savoir, et d'ailleurs c'est un principe managérial que personnellement j'ai pu apprendre dans certaines grandes écoles parisiennes, à savoir Sciences Po. À chaque crise, des opportunités. En fait, les crises sont l'occasion d'accélérer l'agenda européiste. On l'a vu avec la crise du Covid, où en effet, alors même que le fiasco était évident, ils ont accéléré cette logique de mainmise sur la santé qui était normalement pas du domaine de la Commission européenne. Et nous avons pu, lors du précédent mandat, voir apparaître la sous-commission santé publique. La guerre en Ukraine, là aussi, excellent exemple, où, au prétexte réel de la guerre, Madame von der Leyen s'est pris soudainement pour un chef d'état-major. Et suite à son élection en juin dernier, elle a demandé au micro 500 milliards d'euros pour l'Ukraine, montant qui, de l'aveu même du commissaire européen en charge de cette question-là, était totalement inventé et fantaisiste. Comme la plupart des chiffres d'ailleurs qui nous sont sortis au sein de la Commission européenne. Donc à chaque fois, en fait, la peur doit amener les populations à à remettre leur destin entre les mains de la Commission européenne. Et moi-même étant membre de la Commission environnement, je pense qu'une des prochaines étapes est aussi la création de nouvelles peurs sur les sujets environnementaux, afin d'avoir la main mise sur, en effet, nos logements, sur la manière dont nous nous déplaçons, et qui est une emprise assez totalitaire parce qu'elle s'immisce dans l'intégralité de l'aspect de notre vie quotidienne.
The third strategy is management by fear. As our comrade Thomas already mentioned. And this is a managerial principle. To each crisis, its opportunity. This you can learn in Sciences Po. Crises are a way to speed up the agenda of the European Commission. When COVID struck, the public health was not within the remit of the Commission, but they themselves decided to integrate it to the remit, and this led to the creation of the Public Health Subcommittee. Other example, the war in Ukraine. In the wake of the war, Ursula von der Leyen thought that she was maybe chief of the joint staff and decided that she would request a 500 billion euro lifeline for Ukraine. And this amount was absolutely invented. Even Thierry Breton, the commissioner in charge of the industrial matters, said it was invented. Every time, fear is about forcing the European people to put their destiny into European hands, even if factually it is the EU's policies who are sowing this chaos. And I am a member of the Envy committee, and I believe that the EU is about to create a new realm of fears, of anxiety, in order to include an increasing number of fields in their remit where it could be environment, it could be housing, it could be other issues. But this is their approach.
Le résultat institutionnel visible est que la Commission européenne troque nos démocraties millénaires pour une vaste technocratie. En fait, c'est pas tant un coup d'État qu'un coup contre la démocratie. Et donc, nos commissaires ne sont pas de futurs ou de potentiels chefs de gouvernement, mais plutôt des technocrates avec une idéologie précise qui tente à nous faire en effet disparaître et à faire mourir la politique. Ces technocrates s'arment d'une armée de fonctionnaires, mais créent également un écosystème propice, avec une valeur scientifique, souvent entouré de lobbies, et Bruxelles en sait quelque chose, c'est-à-dire que même physiquement autour des institutions européennes, les bâtiments sont remplis de lobbies, mais également des ONG, structures qu'on analyse assez peu, et je suis ravie de faire un peu de publicité pour la Fondation Identité Démocratie, où j'ai pu impulser une recherche sur l'influence des ONG au sein des institutions européennes, en fait, au nombre de 3500, elles vivent quand même régulièrement en rencontrant la Commission européenne et vivent largement de ses subsides. Les plus influentes que vous connaissez peut-être sont Bill et Melinda Gates Foundation, le World Economic Forum ou l'Open Society de George Soros. Et clairement, elles contreviennent aux intérêts européens, mais font office de ressources scientifiques pour la Commission européenne. On a pu constater d'ailleurs que depuis 2007, des ONG islamistes, clairement, avaient reçu plus de 64 millions de subventions publiques de la part de cette commission. Et ONG qui servent par ailleurs aussi bien de vivier pour les fonctionnaires européens comme de retraite. C'est-à-dire que les fonctionnaires européens viennent de ces ONG et y repartent quand il est nécessaire pour leur carrière.
The institutional outcome is clearly visible. It is not a coup, but it is a coup against democracy. We are now almost no longer in a democracy, but in a technocracy. And commissioners will not be heads of states or governments. They will be technocrats. And these technocrats will be supported by an army of officials, but also supported by a whole ecosystem composed of lobbies, which are ubiquitous in the European Union Quarter, but also NGOs who, because of their legal status, escape all kinds of scrutiny. They are the ED Foundation, which I am a part of, is looking at the matter of NGOs, and I preside this study. And we have found that there are more than 3,500 of these NGOs that live off the subsidies and the grants of the European Union, but also of the different meetings they can organize. You probably know the most notorious ones. I'm thinking about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the World Economic Forum, the Open Society of George Soros. And though they clearly violate the fundamental interest of the EU, they are still given free rein. And they also sometimes serve as scientific research for the EU. Just to mention a couple, recently we found out that some Islamic NGOs had received more than 64 million euros since 2007. And 2007. And these NGOs also serve as places where former commission officials can find a job and vice versa. There's really a revolving door between these NGOs and the commission.
Thank you very much. And I was sorry, the micro. I was reminded also by my colleagues that we have to conclude this part of the speech. Okay. So if you may say some concluding words, and afterwards you can also talk during the panel discussion. Please. Okay, just a word. Yes. Yeah.
Alors, on pourrait s'arrêter juste au constat un peu déprimant que la Commission européenne essaye de prendre l'intégralité de notre vie quotidienne et de la gérer. Mais il faut savoir que cette Commission européenne a vidé sa substance de la politique. Donc c'est à nous, politiques, de faire de nouveau irruption sur cette scène. Réinjecter un peu de vie dans ce qui est mort dans cette Union européenne, à savoir la politique, soit le carrefour entre la morale, la philosophie, la sociologie, les sciences humaines. Là où la politique et les femmes politiques doivent faire irruption, la volonté des peuples peut supplanter. Comme je vous disais, la Commission européenne est un manager. Nous sommes les PDG, finalement, de cette Europe. Nous devons les changer. Nous devons leur donner des ordres parce qu'ils ne sont là que par la volonté des peuples, finalement, ces institutions. L'Union européenne est votre maison. Charge à vous, donc, de réinjecter de la politique et de changer pour reprendre simplement votre liberté.
Thank you very much.
So we could stop at this very depressing finding and stop at this overbearance of the Commission on our lives. But let us not stop there. Let us think about what we can do. And what we can do is bring back politics in this whole endeavor. Politics, which is at the crossroad of philosophy, sociology, human sciences, and economic sciences. And it is there that we, citizens of the European Union, must act and must make the will of people prevail. We are the bosses. The EU is our home, and it's up to us to change it.
Thank you very much. So now we arrived at the point of this event where we open the floor to the public as well. So we are really encouraging you to ask questions. This is the Q&A session, and the aim is to have 2 rounds of questions. So in the first round, we will take a few ones, then the speakers will reply in block, and then we go for a second round. So if someone is shy at the beginning, they can still ask in the second round, but don't be shy. Let's go for the questions, please.
First of all, I really enjoyed the
Thank you. And we have the microphone as well from my colleague Andrea.
This is Scarlett, Rix Europe. I really enjoyed the presentation, and I'm looking forward to read the details of the report. But I'm very curious about the solutions, because we did address the issue. It's affecting all of us. But I think right now we need to look how can we solve it. You were saying that it's our responsibility, and I totally agree. So my question to you is, what responsibility can we take as citizens, and how also are you going to reflect it in the parliament?
Yep. Thank you. Other question, sir?
Yes, thank you very much for this interesting contributions. I think in addition to the 3 points you mentioned, COVID crisis, Ukrainian and Euro crisis, von der Leyen couldn't expect that all these crises would come, but she had an overwhelming narrative of the climate crisis, which, and I think I had the impression that after the Ukrainian crisis, the Green Deal was much less important, because there was another crisis which was much closer, and she could use it. What's your opinion on that?
Oh, a lot of questions. So for the lady in the second row, please. You. Andrea, please.
Thank you. I was curious about the prospect of the unanimity system. Where do you foresee this going, and how can we prevail it? Avoid it. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's go for 2 or 3 other questions. Maybe we will take someone from the back to be equalized. Okay. Tamás.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me. I'm Zsófia Tolbíró, head of office of the European Conservatives Brussels office. So yes, it was clear that we are frogs in a pot, so to speak. We are, experiencing the slow death of Europe as we know it. The question I would have, of course, similar to the first 2 or 3, is like, what we need is a strong conservative front, a united conservative front, to be able to push back on the globalist agenda. But with the cordon sanitaire that the patriots are experiencing, it's, democracy was thrown out the window again, and all those, the voters' will is not respected. So, practically speaking, how could we advance this conservative collaboration to represent a united front, as I said at the beginning?
Thank you. Okay, sir. Thanks.
Thank you. My name is Most Appelblad from the Brussels Times. You both described the European Commission as a very powerful body, even as a state in its own, opposed against the member
Could you please
states.
speak closer to the microphone?
Okay. I referred to what you both said, that the Commission is a very powerful body, even a state in its own, and it has different interests than the member states. But how could this happen, considering, let's say, the checks and balances we have in the European Union? I think about, you mentioned yourself, European Court of Auditors, European Court of Justice, and also European Court of Auditors. And what about European Parliament? I mean, which is supposed to exercise scrutiny and oversight of the Commission, and is involved in the so-called co-decision procedures, which means that very often the Commission's own legislative proposals are not approved and they are amended. So how does that fit into your problem description?
Thank you very much. I think that we can go for the answers. So, Thomas, would you like to start this time?
Yeah. Okay. Well, many of the questions seem to verge on the question of what to do, so I'll try and address that. Obviously, that's what we all want to know, and I wish I had the answers, which of course I don't. But we can reflect on. Well, let's begin looking at why it's been so hard to change things in Europe so far. There are a number of structural reasons. So, of course, one, the quickest way to reinstore, sovereignty and democracy, almost overnight, is for a country to, leave the EU or the euro. But of course, there are huge technical and political obstacles to that. But I think it's worth mentioning that that's one option that is on the table. Putting that option aside for now, and asking ourselves what we can do within the European Union. Of course, what we need to do is what conservative and sovereigntist parties have been doing for quite some time. I would say even quite successfully if we look at the new Patriot Group in the European Parliament and etc. And that is to build a consensus within the European Union for change. But of course, the European Union seems is almost structurally built in order to make kind of democratic change impossible. So one could change the treaties, democratize the treaties, think up a completely new institutional balance for the European Union that diminishes the powers of the Commission, gives power back to nation states, etc. But of course, reforming the treaties requires unanimity, i.e., every single country in the European Union would have to agree on the reforms that are necessary. That's obviously never going to happen. So that's impossible.
Sorry, so that was the solution from your part? So,
well,
the answer to the question on the solution.
That was why
I think that since it was a major question, we can give the floor to Mathilde so that she can also answer this, and then we go by block a bit.
Alors, quelle solution? Alors, c'est plutôt ma partie en tant que en tant que militante politique. Alors, il faut apprendre à être patient. La politique. C'est très frustrant, en effet, de voir une Commission européenne prendre de plus en plus d'espace, et d'espace même dans notre vie. Mais il faut être patient, ça se construit doucement. Alors c'est facile, moi je vous parle depuis une élection européenne où le Rassemblement national a fait 33%, ce qui est un score historique. Et qui est donc le premier parti de France. On est dans un lieu abrité, couvé du regard par la Hongrie, qui elle aussi, via la gouvernance de Viktor Orban, permet aussi au moins d'avoir quelques coups franches au sein du pays, mais c'est compliqué. On ne vous cache pas que c'est compliqué. Et il faut aussi nous-mêmes travailler pour utiliser un peu les armes de l'ennemi, si je puis dire. C'est-à-dire que vous parliez d'un front unique conservateur, je crois, au fond de la salle. Alors c'est un terme qu'on utilise un peu moins, nous, en France, mais en tout cas, oui, un front uni, il faut savoir mener aussi une guerre culturelle. Ces gens-là, on peut dénoncer les lobbies, on peut dénoncer les ONG, mais charge à nous de monter des lobbies. Charge à nous de monter des ONG. Charge à nous d'aller chercher des jeunes, comme le fait le MCC, pour les former. Charge à nous de monter des écoles, en fait, d'éduquer aussi nos enfants dans cet état d'esprit, dans cet amour de la liberté, dans cet amour de notre histoire. C'est un processus quotidien, un processus de chaque jour. C'est aussi une manière de vivre et de se défendre. Ça peut sembler idéaliste, mais c'est une solution. Ces gens-là, à terme, vont devenir minoritaires. En plus, ils ont en horreur la démographie européenne faite maison, si je puis dire. Et donc, oui, construisez des familles, faites-vous des amis, faites-vous des réseaux. Et ces gens-là, avec leurs armes, finalement, il faut que nous apprenions à nous approprier leurs armes. Ils ont réussi à faire... La gauche est fantastique pour ça. La gauche, c'est une excellente école. Ils ont un réseau associatif, mais démentiel. Ils vivent d'argent public, de votre argent. Vous financez vos ennemis. Charge à vous, maintenant, de faire en sorte de financer vos bonnes actions, votre réseau à vous. Construisez-le. Ayez du courage. Et c'est ça qui est le plus dur. Ayez de la patience, parce que le désespoir est une bêtise en politique.
Thank you. You can keep it, I think. Just put there.
Solutions. It's my job as a politician. But my first recommendation is be patient. politics is frustrating. The Commission's overbearing power is frustrating. Of course, I speak from a comfortable position as a member of a party which has just received 33% of the votes in France. It's a historic score. We are the first party of France. And akin to Hungary, we have a certain leeway in what we can do. I believe that what we must do is to use our enemy's weapons. We have to enter the culture war. This is, for me, what we could do to present a united front. We need to denounce NGOs and denounce lobbies, but we also need to create our own NGOs. We also need to create our own lobbies. And we also need to really raise awareness, as the MCC does. We need to create our own schools. We need to really inculcate to our children love for their history, love for their country, love for their civilization. It's really a day-to-day task that we have to carry out. It may be an idealist solution, but it is, according to me, the solution. Other solution is demography. Of course, the EU hates homegrown demography. But what I recommend is that you create families, you create networks, and we must use the weapon. By the way, the left is excellent in using their weapons. They live off subsidies. They have 1 million organizations, and they live off your taxpayer money. So our job, your job, is to be brave and to be patient.
Thank you very much. And maybe some short answers to the other questions, because we would like to give the floor once again, and we are running out of time. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, just very briefly what I was saying. I mean, I just want to finish what I was saying earlier super briefly, and then I will address another question. I think it's important to remind ourselves that, you know, we've been celebrating the differences among countries here. That's something that, you know, we cherish, but that's also what makes you know, EU-level collaboration between countries so hard, because, you know, conservatives can agree on some issues, but then there will always be countries have their own identities and historical trajectories, and that's why, for example, on Ukraine, you know, frontline countries will always have a different approach to Russia than Western European countries. So it's important to recognize that, you know, the differences among countries that we cherish are also the reason why it's sometimes hard to find consensus at the European level. I think there's a lot that individual countries can do, and Hungary, I think, has shown that to a large degree. We need more insubordination from parties and from governments. I think, you know, governments should be a bit braver, and even when they are blackmailed by the Commission, they should have the courage to stand up to the Commission, because, you know, even if that will have consequences, but it will also force them to, you know, take their mask off, and that will, I think, contribute enormously to raising people's awareness about, you know, what's actually going on. And then very briefly, the question about, you know, what about all these checks and balances? But sorry, sir, but you mentioned the European Court of Justice, and the European Court of Auditors and the European Parliament. I mean, these are all institutions that historically have been committed to, you know, federalism and supranationalization. The European Court of Justice uses every opportunity it has, every sentence it has, to promote supranationalization and to take power away from nation states. The European Parliament has historically been committed to empowering the Commission. We're still waiting for the European Court of Auditors to actually do something about the missing Pfizergate text messages. They don't seem to be that keen about working on that. You know, I don't think what you said contradicts at all what we've just said.
Thank you. Mathilde, maybe you want to answer some other questions, for example, on the cordon sanitaire. It's a very Frenchy topic as well.
Il est vrai que c'est très, très frustrant d'être dans ce cordon sanitaire, comme si nous étions des pestiférés, des malades. Le terme est aussi très injurieux, somme toute. Écoutez, leur mépris nous passe un peu au-dessus, nous qui nous le vivons au quotidien. Le souci, c'est que nous portons aussi les espoirs et aussi les malheurs de millions d'Européens. Et alors, charge à nous maintenant de trouver des brèches qui existent. Hein. Parfois, voilà, je suis par exemple en commission femmes au Parlement européen. Typiquement, si vous voulez parler de féminisme, soit, allons-y, prenons un sujet que la gauche aime énormément. Mais si on parlait des menaces faites aux femmes par l'islamisme, voilà, il faut apprendre à... C'est un principe de politique qui s'appelle la triangulation, c'est-à-dire de prendre les sujets de l'opposant pour le ramener à soi. Et somme toute, je pense que nous sommes les plus féministes, beaucoup plus féministes que ces gens de gauche. Et il faut réussir à le percer petit à petit. Et au bout d'un moment, vous ne pouvez pas non plus faire taire des millions et des millions de personnes. Nous, en France, très concrètement, là, on le vit en ce moment, on n'a pas vraiment de gouvernement parce que le cordon sanitaire est juste une aberration au vu des 11 millions de Français qui ont soutenu Jordan Bardella et Marine Le Pen. Donc, faites nombre, faites-vous entendre, et allez chercher justement toutes ces failles dans ce système qui est en plus clairement faillible, car failli. Et il existe des portes, charge à nous de les ouvrir. N'ayons pas peur et n'ayons pas honte parce que nous sommes les porte-parole de millions de gens qui souffrent des politiques décidées par la Commission européenne.
Thank you very much.
It is true that the cordon sanitaire is very frustrating. We are compared to people who have the plague. I mean, it's very vulgar, I would say, even it's boorish. But their contempt flies over our heads. We are here because we defend the concerns of millions of European citizens. And we could also, as I said earlier, use their weapons against them and use what we could call triangulation. I am at the FAM committee. If we want to talk about feminism, let's talk about feminism. But let's talk about the threat of Islamists in Europe, and then we could talk about feminism. So we should use their issues and throw them in their face. And I believe we are more feminist than the leftists. France has currently no government because of this aberration of the cordon sanitaire. But this flies in the face of 11 million French voters. And we cannot stay silent if we want to support our citizens. So we need to make our voice heard. We need to speak up because the system is a failed system and it is our duty to use all the weapons we have to combat it.
Thank you very much. And the second round of questions for Q&A. In the microphone. Okay. So if you didn't hear my colleague, please speak in the microphone. Yes, please.
Thank you very much for a very interesting discussion. From the history, we know that coups happen when the power becomes weaker and corrupt. Isn't it the right time for people elected, board of the European Union to play the bigger role, and then maybe the balance can be restored? Because for many years, we have seen that Parliament role is diminishing while Commission becomes stronger. And while the only people's elected body is European Parliament. How many European Parliament resolutions are taken into consideration by the Commission? I don't know the statistics, but I'm sure that very low percentage of this recommendation.
Thank you. Thank you. Frank, please.
Well, I'm actually glad that many parliamentary decisions are ignored because on balance they tend to go in the wrong direction. But basically I just want to say that there's every reason to be optimistic. You know, when I came to Brussels a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, the situation was far worse than now. The political climate was much more in the hands of the left. They were very confident, they were very cocky, they were very arrogant. They're not so arrogant now. You know, after the elections in France and in Holland and in Austria and in Germany, many other places, they are getting to be scared. And you can really see that they are no longer as arrogant as they used to be, for very good reasons. I think it's the left playing.
Coupure d'électricité. It's like at Netcon.
Yeah, well, get out of here. Go to the Commission. And I think it's interesting because even though the right is divided, when you add up all the right, the Patriots, the ECR, the APP, we are the majority now in terms of voting possibilities, and that was shown recently. It doesn't mean to say that's going to happen, but the point I want to make is that there is no reason why the cordon sanitaire cannot be destroyed. I mean, look at the way, even in Germany, the cordon sanitaire is gradually unraveling. And it cannot be destroyed because, for better or worse, even sections of the left are worried about the effects of mass migration. When you have the German government panicking in the way that they are panicking, it indicates that everything that we've said within the Patriots and also within the other section of the right is absolutely true. So it seems to me that the way forward for us is to ignore the cordon sanitaire, pretend it doesn't really exist, open up to everybody, and just take the initiative. I think what Mathilde said about fighting the culture wars is really important. Because if we don't fight the culture wars, it will come back to kill us. So, for example, I hear that they're trying to bring in new culture war issues into the EU. At the moment, they're talking about making prostitution no longer a national issue, but making that into an EU affair. And once they begin to move in that kind of direction, then every single cultural matter, every single issue to do with personal behavior can become something that the EU's got very strong opinions about. So let's use our optimism and, in a sense, go on the offensive and treat the left with all the contempt that they deserve. We need to be arrogant. We need to be confident. We need to be pushy. And no longer can we afford to be defensive on any of the issues of the day.
Thank you very much. I think that we have the time for one more question. Oh, yes, difficult to choose, but maybe the young man here on the left, on my left.
Thank you for taking my question, and thank you for your speeches. My question revolves around the question of unanimity that Mr. Fadzi was talking about. And I'm wondering, what do you think about this principle in essence? Because you were mentioning how it is a hindrance in regards to dealing with this issue of the European Commission's power grab. But of course, the principle of unanimity can also work for the right in protecting, for example, my country of Hungary, because we rely on other countries that are also agreeing with us to protect us in certain situations. What do you think about this principle, and do you think it should be addressed directly, or do you think issues like this should be addressed through other channels?
Thank you very much. So, if you want to start, Mathilde.
Je pense que le principe d'unanimité est essentiel. Il est essentiel pour le respect des ce qu'on appelle les plus petits pays, voilà, qui ont une démographie, une géographie plus restreinte. Au-delà du respect, en effet, c'est une sorte de verrou qui protège les destins nationaux. En effet, surtout quand une commission est aussi vorace et vous prend l'intégralité des sujets, y compris la guerre, la décision de faire la guerre, je n'ai pas envie qu'un jour on vienne chez moi sonner en me disant qu'un Lituanien, malgré tout le respect que j'ai pour eux, un Lituanien, un Polonais, un Bulgare, disent à mon mari ou à mon fils, vous allez partir à la guerre. Voilà. C'est encore, et je l'espère encore pour longtemps, un verrou essentiel pour le respect et même notre protection. Si ce verrou saute, en effet, énormément de choses vont s'accélérer et sûrement être bouleversées. Est-ce que ce sera ça peut-être le début de la fin de la Commission européenne ? Peut-être. Mais en l'occurrence, oui, je pense que c'est un principe essentiel au respect élémentaire de l'équilibre et des équilibres européens.
Thank you very much.
I believe the principle of unanimity is absolutely crucial. Specifically for, so to speak, smaller countries, it is for them a way to protect themselves, to protect their national destiny. I'm thinking specifically about the Commission's power grab in the many remits. that it is already encroaching upon, notably war. I do not want tomorrow that my husband is sent to war because the Polish or the Lithuanian or the Bulgarian government has decided that it was essential for him. With all due respect to these people, of course, but I do not want this to happen. I believe unanimity is essential for protection of our own national destinies. And if there is no unanimity, well, it might lead to a great upheaval, a break, and it might signify the end of the European Commission. But in any case, I still believe unanimity is essential for protecting our national destinies.
Thank you. Thomas?
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, I think getting rid of unanimity would make the situation even worse for countries like Hungary, no doubt. But at the same time, unanimity is what makes building consensus and among countries at the European level almost impossible, which is what ultimately empowers the Commission. Because the countries, whenever a crisis erupts, the Commission comes along and says, oh, we can't wait for you guys to find an agreement. Now we're 30 countries, as I said, with very different identities, very different, values, historical traditions, etc., etc. And so that's what allows the Commission to say, okay, I'm going to take control of things because you guys can't agree on anything. Now, that doesn't mean that I believe that we should get rid of unanimity. I mean, I think this is just why the European Union as such does not work. Unanimity doesn't work, but getting rid of unanimity would be also very problematic. And yes, I mean, to respond to Frank, I mean, I'm sorry, Frank, you're right. I'm always way too pessimistic. I didn't want to be. I mean, I agree that, obviously the tide is changing at the national level. I mean, every election shows that. So you are right. There is reason to be optimistic. I just think we shouldn't underestimate just how much of a hinder to that change the European Union is. That's all. We should never lose the focus of that. It would be much easier for for this tide of change to actually bring about actual change if the European Union wasn't there. The European Union continues to remain a massive obstacle to democratic and so-called populist politics. But we have to go on fighting. I totally agree with you, Frank.
Thank you. Do you think that these are your words of conclusion, or you want to add something to conclude the whole event?
That sounds
That
sounds like a good way to conclude.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mathieu. Do you want to have some concluding words?
À dire vrai, je pense qu'on a fait le tour de la question. Je vous invite donc à faire de la politique parce que nous sommes certainement le continent le plus politique, le plus politisé historiquement depuis des millénaires, le berceau de la démocratie. Donc je vous invite à prendre les bras grands ouverts cet magnifique héritage, histoire de le faire vivre encore des milliers et des milliers d'années.
Thank you very much.
Truthfully, I believe that we've addressed the issue. What I'd like to invite you to do is to do politics. Our continent is the most politicized in the world. It is the cradle of democracy, so you should seize that inheritance and do politics.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mathieu Dandouet. Thank you very much, Thomas Pazzi. Thank you very much for the translation. Thank you for coming. 3 important things not to forget. The first, that we will have a reception right now. You won't forget because you will see and you will profit from it. Second, do not hesitate to read the report. On your chairs you found the QR codes which lead to the report online, so you can easily find them. And third, we will have this event that was promoted before on the 24th. So on economic matters, please join us at that occasion as well. Thank you very much again, and enjoy the reception. Thank you.
Thank you.